Hi guys, so today we are working on my first piece for Mermaid. And as you can see here, this one is going to be traditional. I decided I wanted to do this first piece in gouache. And so when I was looking at the prompts, Celebration wasn't really jiving with me, so I looked for a couple different other prompt lists, and I chose Pearl. And I also chose the Pantone Mermaid theme as well, so this is a particular pink that's listed there. You can see here I am actually working on the various different compositions that I like, and this particular one I really started to enjoy. I like the idea of her arms being full of muscles, because I kind of wanted it to be a title piece, not something that was super thematic or anything, just a mermaid and the Mermaid 2020 listed there. I figured there was going to be at least a couple sketches in the sketchbook that were going to be Mermaid that followed this one. You can see here, since I liked this particular one, I wanted to do a quick line art because I figured I might use it to figure out the coloring. Excuse my hand kind of being in the way here. Perks of being left-handed. One thing I did learn is that I really shouldn't line things with this particular pen. It's really smudgy, and it takes forever to dry. Just working out the hair. Floaty hair is always difficult to draw, because it's so poofy. Alright, and here again, I sketched that particular pose once more, and then I also did it a little bit bigger so that way I could see more details and figure out exactly what I wanted to do. And I lined it again because I was going to do the color test with this. Unfortunately, I did not wait long enough for it to dry, so after I finished putting these lines in, then I was going to erase it, and when I did that, that's where things went a little bit haywire. As you can see, it's smudged all over the place because that pupil definitely wasn't dry. See here, I'm just using my chameleon markers to get an idea of what colors I want to use for the piece. At this point, I wasn't sure whether or not I was going to use my chameleon markers or use my gouache. I did decide to use my gouache after messing around with the chameleon markers a little bit. I wanted to use this particular challenge to stretch myself both digitally and traditionally. So all the pieces from my Mermaid is going to be a mixture of digital and traditional pieces. See me here grabbing my pink? This is, again, we're making sure that you have the right pen for the tool or for the paint that you're using is a big deal. This particular pen, whenever the marker interacts with it, immediately starts to smudge again. You can see that really bad whenever I get to the face. Typically, if I'm using a micron, this does not happen, but I was being a little bit lazy. Adding in some hair color there. This is one of the cool things about the chameleon markers. You can see that the value of this marker started out lighter and then it got darker. That's because the chameleon markers allow you to do this. They actually have an end on their markers that is just full of medium, so you're actually able to thin out the pigment and make a lighter tone. You can see here I'm sketching out the main piece with my Col-Erase pencil here. You have to excuse my hand being in the way. Once again, I am left-handed, and sometimes the angle that I draw at puts my hand right in the way. In a minute, I actually change the positioning of the camera, and you'll have to tell me if you like that more. Alright, so I've actually pulled out my gouache here. You can see that that paintbrush is loaded with paint. I don't recommend putting that much paint on your paintbrush, but my gouache is old and was really, really clumpy, and so I have been trying to unclump it and added a lot of water and ended up having a lot of paint in my paintbrush. And because it was so old, I was going to have to throw away this gouache right after I finished this painting, and so I didn't want to waste any of the paint. So here I'm just laying down a coat to get a base coat for her skin. And then right here, I was really timid because it had been a really long time since I had used a paintbrush for anything. I'm just trying to map out all her features and avoid places like her eyes that I'm going to want to remain white. I also avoid her eyebrows right here, but in the end I actually go back in and cover those up. Trying to get the edge of that face. I still end up with it looking a little bit bumpy, which I go back in and fix later. I was so scared to cover up my line art here, and it's one of the things that I do need to practice because I would like to get back into more traditional artwork, and when you're using paints, your line art is going to get covered back up, and you just have to remember where those features are. And you can go back in and add them again later with a light pen or a light pencil or something after the paint is dried. You can see when working with gouache, I like to work in sections and fill in. This is coming over from my marker using days where you try to fill in sections so that way your blending works out better. But again, this brush is loaded with paint. I have not had to dip back in once at this point to reload the paintbrush. Now I've got all the skin in for the first layer. So I'm going to add in some darker values for like the tip of the nose, the blush on the cheeks, and things like that. And this is a style that I particularly like when other people do, and I haven't quite worked out how to do it myself at this point. But I'm learning, and that's the important thing, right? The other thing to note is that this entire painting was done with this one brush. So many of my brushes are so old at this point that I need to get new ones. But I want to invest in good ones, so I'm buying a few at a time. So expect whenever I have paintings that you'll probably see this particular brush quite a bit. But I'm actually pretty proud of the variation that I was able to get with just using this one brush. So here I'm kind of outlining some areas where some deep shadows would be. One of the things I always like in my fully lined pieces is a very deep shadow right under the chin. If I'm working with pen, I typically do that in black, but I really like the way it turned out here with the dark red. I'm doing that with the edge of the nose there too. Now I'm adding in some highlights, just lightly. The one thing with gouache is it's very opaque, so you can cover up a lot of mistakes if you need to, or you can add some water to it and blend it out more. As you can see here in a minute is what I end up doing to kind of make these highlights seem a little less harsh. Here I'm going in with kind of a mid-tone to add in some lighter shading, and then onto the tail. Again, this is one of those cases where a larger brush might have been nicer to cover this large area in a couple of nice smooth strokes. Instead, I had to do it in kind of these thinner strokes, which you saw got a little streaky there, but you can fix that by coming in with more layers, which I do decide to do later on, and I do also hide it with some texture that I added off camera because my battery died and I didn't realize it. I'm not usually one for the color pink, but I particularly like the way this drawing turned out. I've never been a huge fan of pink until recently. Not necessarily for me to wear, but for color choices of characters and stuff. I've liked using pink recently. You can see here I'm kind of blending out this abrupt line right here. All I did was actually add some water to my brush and scrub at the page a little bit. This, since I am working in my yellow sketchbook, did mean that the paper kind of balled up a little bit, so I wouldn't recommend scrubbing in the yellow sketchbook very much. If you're just applying one smooth coat, then it doesn't seem to do that pilling as bad. But again, it's a sketchbook. It's not necessarily meant for wet media, unless you're buying a wet media sketchbook. And again, adding some of that pink value there to kind of blend out the gradient to the tail there. Coming back in with those highlights. And also trying to smooth out some areas that got a little bit thick because of how much paint was on my paintbrush there at the beginning. It can make things look a little clumpy. I'm adding in a very deep red for shadow there. One of the things I want to work on in the future is some of my backgrounds and things like that, because I have a tendency to draw the full character before even thinking about the background, and that can make them kind of look like they're not grounded in space. Here you can see I'm adding in the white for the eyes here. Again, this was a scary thing to be doing with such a large brush because I felt like I could very easily put white in the wrong spot. But I was able to keep my touch light enough that that didn't happen. And see how abused that brush is there on the end. It's really starting to split some. There's adding a little bit of a highlight there to the very top edge, where the light would be catching the eyelid. I feel like that did really smooth out the edges of that white. Going back in with that dark color to kind of outline the edge of the head. And other places, like in those, to define those fingers over there. In the shoulder. One of the very hard things about working with one brush like this is that line variation. So there's only I can only go so thin with the point of that brush without losing my control, which is something that actually is a really good practicing technique. So the more that you practice with just one brush, the stronger your control is going to get when working in paint this way. Because it's definitely not like working with the tip of a pen. The tip of a brush flexes a lot more than the tip of a pen would. You can see as I try to, when I'm working on something like this, start on something that I'm not as concerned with looking perfect. So you can notice that I started doing these outlines on the arms here, and then whenever I felt like I had good control, I then moved up and worked on the face. That's because in any painting, your face is the most important thing. So if I feel like I'm trying to learn something, I typically save that learning, or I save that part of the painting, the face, for the last piece that I do, because at that point I feel like I have learned as much as I can from this piece before starting on the face. You can see here I'm just kind of outlining the lips a little bit to give them some more definition. It is one of my least favorite things in this painting, but altogether I feel like it turned out okay. Doing the same there with the eyes to kind of give some eyelashes, or the illusion of eyelashes there. And this is where I can really see how much my control actually improved on this piece, because those lines would have been hard to do at the beginning. Same here with adding in the irises here. Trying to get that circle would have been really difficult when I first started it, but I felt like by this point, I had learned how to do the circles pretty well. Adding in some eyebrows. She's got to look fabulous, you know? And adding in some lower lashes there. Now looking back, I don't really feel like this piece needed those lower lashes, but sometimes you get too into a piece and you just don't notice. And now I started to work on the hair. And this is one of those things where you can call it, happy accidents. So I was trying to outline very easily, but my brush was too loaded with water there, so things were kind of puddling a little bit. Which in one case I wanted it because I kind of wanted it to look kind of galaxy-like. But at the same time, it did pool in ways that I wasn't expecting. Using that same dark color here on the tail. I like to work with a limited color palette, so that does sometimes mean that colors are reused, but since the tail and her hair weren't going to be crossing at any point in this composition, it was okay for them to be the same value. You can see here jumping in with the texture that I added to the tail that it kind of helped to blend out some of those harsh lines from the shadows and the shade and the highlights. You can see here also my fingers are covered in paint, so ignore that. My black paint tube kind of exploded all over the place. You can see here, oh no, puddle. I'm trying to dab as much of it up with a paper towel as possible as I add in her pearl necklace. And this is where masking fluid would have come in handy. If I could have masked off those little spots, or around those little spots, then I wouldn't have had to be so careful and have to do the crazy amount of painting in the tiny little holes that were left behind by waiting to put the pearls in later. Now I'm adding in the pupils. Again, with this big brush is another one of those things that's pretty difficult. I also went ahead and added in some dark lines in the hair to kind of give some variation there. But I try to use the black sparingly in a piece because, especially like this that doesn't have any line art, because it's just going to end up being a distraction because it's so harsh against all the softer colors that are in the painting. So I really only use that black in areas that light would not be touching at all. Adding in a little bit of highlights there to her lips. And that same color that I used as the actual shadow elsewhere. Because again, you gotta use that same paint as much as you can whenever you're getting ready to run out of it. See here, adding in some lines. And here you can see how shaky my hand can get. This is actually another lesson. Make sure your blood sugar is kept up, guys. I was starting to get really hungry at this point, and I kept painting instead of going and getting a snack. And so my hand was starting to shake quite a bit at this point. But sometimes, like I know everybody can be, I can be a little bit stubborn, and I was like, I'm going to finish this piece before I eat. Just adding in some more of those defining lines to the muscles that she's holding. Or clams, I'm not sure what they're supposed to be at this point. Originally they were supposed to be like whatever produces pearls. So I guess clams? Can't believe I don't know that. Usually I know all the animal facts. Alright, and here's where I went in and added that kind of blue bar to show off the mermaid thing. This was actually my least favorite part of the piece. I feel like I really could have concepted this whole part out a little bit better. But once you got that much paint down on paper, you kind of have to stick with it. And you can see here, this is what I meant by that masking fluid being nice to have. So if I had had that masking fluid, I could have masked off those little dots and just painted a nice flat blue right there. But instead I had to kind of very carefully dab in the holes, which made it kind of patchy. And again, another area, having a bigger brush would have been nice. But instead I chose to stick with the small brush here, since at this point I had done most of the painting with one brush, so I figured, why not stick to it and make that the point of this painting? And you can see me over there trying to get some color out of that glob of blue. Again, most of my gouaches were so dried out at this point that there was almost no getting them back. Half of them I couldn't get out of the tube. Get in really close to the edges of the piece, that way there's not a weird white outline. You can see here I'm adding the eye shine there to her pupils. I also try to do this on all of the pearls as well in a minute. I always feel like this stage is what really brings a piece to life, is these last little details that you add in. And since she's a fish, I kind of added some white like freckles to be like to give the illusion of scales being there. So we all know fish have very shiny scales. I put a little bit of a white dot there in her hair, but I wasn't super happy. You can see here I actually pulled out my pen to do some outlining because I didn't like how the edges of those shells looked. So I actually went in with the pen to define them a little bit more. I still wasn't too happy. Again, that shaky hand syndrome and using the wrong pen. You can see me right there trying to figure out why I didn't like that. Typically, I love adding ink. It was about right here that I went, you know what? No, I need to grab one of my microns or fine liner pens, because this is just too smudgy and too wet. And it took me a while to find them, apparently. There we go. Yeah, so there I go back in. So at that point I had added some dark lines just to the areas again that were going to have the most shadow applied to them. There I'm trying to add in some highlights to the pearls. I probably, if I was to do this piece again, go in and do a white outline around the edge of her face and the pearls. But there we go. So this was my first piece for Mermay. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you liked this video, please comment, like, and subscribe to get new videos every Wednesday and Saturday. Thank you.